This message may have found you for a reason. Maybe recently someone walked out of your life. Maybe the relationship you trusted suddenly changed. Maybe a friend you relied on disappeared, or someone you loved deeply became distant. And now you're sitting there wondering, why did this happen? Why did God allow someone to leave my life? Why did things change when everything seemed fine? It hurts. Because when someone leaves, it doesn't just remove a person. It removes memories, plans, expectations. You imagine them in your future. You thought they would be part of your journey. And when they suddenly disappear, it feels like something inside you has been pulled away. You might even be questioning yourself. Was it something I did? Did I make a mistake? Did I say the wrong thing? But here is something I want you to hear today. Something that may change how you see this entire situation. Sometimes the people leaving your life is not a loss. Sometimes it is divine protection. Sometimes God removes people because they cannot go where He is taking you. And right now, even though it hurts, even though it feels confusing, God may be protecting your future in ways you cannot yet see. Because here's the truth. Not everyone assigned to your present is assigned to your destiny. Some people are seasonal. They were meant to walk with you for a moment, but they were never meant to walk with you forever. And when their season ends, God quietly begins moving them out of the way. But here's the part most people don't realize. When God removes someone from your life, He is not punishing you. He is positioning you. And sometimes the removal is actually the beginning of your promotion. You see, we often pray for growth. We pray for new opportunities. We pray for bigger purpose. We pray for doors to open, but we forget something important. Sometimes before God opens new doors, He must remove the people who would keep us standing in the old ones. Because some people in your life may love you, but they cannot understand the calling on your life. Some people may care about you, but they cannot handle the level God is preparing you for. And sometimes, without realizing it, they start limiting your vision. They start planting doubt. They start holding you in the version of yourself that God is trying to grow you out of. So God begins to do something quietly behind the scenes. He starts shifting relationships. He starts creating distance. He starts removing connections. And at first, it feels painful because we interpret removal as rejection, but heaven interprets it as realignment. God is not rejecting you. He is redirecting you. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening in their lives. They think they are losing people. But in reality, they are being protected from what those people would eventually bring. Because God can see what you cannot. He sees the conversations you haven't heard. He sees the intentions you haven't noticed. He sees the moments that would have broken your heart later. And out of His love, He sometimes removes someone before the damage happens. But here's what makes this moment difficult. When someone leaves, we usually focus only on what we lost. We focus on the memories. We focus on the connection. We focus on what could have been. But we rarely ask the deeper question, what was God protecting me from? Because sometimes the closed door you're grieving today was protecting you from a storm you never saw coming. And one day, when you look back at this season, you may realize something surprising. You may realize that God removing that person is one of the greatest acts of protection in your life. Let me tell you a simple story. There was a farmer who planted seeds every year. He would carefully prepare the soil. He would water the ground. He would take care of the field. But one season, something unusual happened. The rain stopped. The crops began growing slowly. And many people around him started giving up. They said the season was ruined. They said the harvest would fail. But the farmer did something different. He continued preparing the soil. He continued removing weeds. He continued trusting the process. Months later, when the rain finally returned, his crops grew stronger than anyone expected, because while everyone else focused on the delay, he focused on preparation. And this is exactly how God often works in our lives. Sometimes relationships leave. Sometimes doors close. Sometimes people disappear, and it feels like something important has been taken away. But what you cannot see yet is what God is preparing beneath the surface. Because just like seeds grow underground before they appear above ground, your future is often being prepared in places you cannot yet see. And here's the powerful truth. God is always working behind the scenes. Even when life looks confusing, even when relationships shift, even when people walk away, God is still working. God is still preparing. God is still positioning you. But here's what most people don't realize. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs in life begin with a separation. Because separation creates space. Space for growth. Space for new connections. Space for new opportunities. Space for the person God is preparing to enter your life. And if the wrong people stayed, the right ones would never arrive. Because God cannot send the next level of your life into a space that is already filled with the wrong relationships. So He begins cleaning the room, removing what no longer belongs, shifting what is out of alignment, preparing the environment for something better. And yes, sometimes that process feels lonely. Sometimes it feels confusing. Sometimes it feels like your circle is becoming smaller. But here's the perspective shift. Your circle is not shrinking. It is being refined. Because the higher God takes you, the fewer people can walk that path with you. And that's not punishment. That's preparation. Because every level of your life requires different people, different mindsets, different energies, different visions. And sometimes, people who were perfect for your previous season are not equipped for your next one. This reminds me of something we see in the Bible. Before Joseph stepped into the palace, he experienced separation. He was separated from his brothers, separated from his home, separated from everything familiar. At the time, it looked like betrayal. It looked like loss. It looked like his life was falling apart. But what Joseph could not see yet was that God was moving him step by step toward his purpose. The pit, the prison, the waiting, none of it made sense in the moment. But every separation was positioning him for the palace. And this is where everything begins to change for you. Because what feels like removal today may actually be divine positioning. What feels like loss today may actually be protection. What feels like rejection today may actually be redirection. God knows exactly where your life is going. And sometimes He removes people, not because they are bad people, but because they are not part of the future He is preparing for you. And if they stayed, they would slow down the journey. They would distract the mission. They would delay the breakthrough. So God lovingly, quietly moves them out of the way, not to hurt you, but to help you become who you are meant to be. And here's something important to remember during this season. Just because someone leaves your life does not mean you are not valuable. It does not mean you are not loved. It does not mean you are not enough. Sometimes people leave simply because their role in your story is finished. Their chapter has ended. But your story is still being written, and your greatest chapters may still be ahead, because God is not finished with you. Your purpose is still unfolding. Your future is still being prepared. Your breakthrough is still being arranged. And sometimes the reason someone had to leave your life is because the next season of your life requires new people. People who believe in your vision. People who support your growth. People who celebrate your calling. People who encourage your faith. And God cannot send those people if the wrong ones never leave. But here's what makes this season challenging. When someone leaves, there is often silence, questions, uncertainty. You want answers. You want closure. You want explanations. But sometimes God does something interesting. He doesn't give you the explanation immediately. He gives you the separation first. Because sometimes the explanation would keep you holding on, but the separation forces you to move forward. And in time, clarity comes. Understanding arrives. And you finally see what God was protecting you from. But here's the key during this season. You cannot allow someone leaving your life to make you believe that your life is falling apart. Because in many cases, it is actually falling into place. You may not see the full picture yet, but God does. You may not understand the shift yet, but heaven does. And the same God who removed someone from your life is the same God who is preparing something better for your future. So don't let this moment convince you that you are alone. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not behind. You are being positioned. God is working behind the scenes. God is arranging connections. God is opening doors you cannot yet see. God is aligning your life with the future He prepared for you. And one day, you may look back at this moment and thank God for the people He removed, because their absence created space for your destiny. And this is where the story becomes even more powerful, because what happens next is something many people never expect. The removal that hurt you often becomes the redirection that elevates you. And in the next part, we're going to talk about something surprising: why God sometimes removes people right before your biggest breakthrough. Because when you understand this, you will stop seeing separation as loss and start seeing it as divine preparation. Sometimes God removes people right before your breakthrough, not months after, not years later, but right before the moment your life begins to change. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They assume the loss means things are getting worse. They assume the separation means they are going backward. But in reality, God is making space for the next level of your life. Because every new level requires new alignment, new environments, new relationships, new mindsets. And sometimes, if certain people stayed in your life, they would unknowingly hold you back from the very blessing you prayed for. Think about it. You prayed for growth. You prayed for opportunity. You prayed for God to elevate your life. But elevation often requires separation, because not everyone can go where God is taking you. Some people are comfortable with the version of you that existed before your growth. They like the old environment, the old habits, the old mindset. But when God begins transforming your life, your direction changes, your focus sharpens, your priorities shift, and suddenly, the relationships that once felt natural begin to feel different. Not because anyone is necessarily wrong, but because your paths are no longer aligned. And this is where the discomfort begins, because we often try to hold on to relationships that God is quietly releasing. We try to repair things that heaven is gently closing. We try to reopen doors that God has already locked. But here's the truth. When God removes someone from your life, He sees something you cannot yet see. He sees the road ahead. He sees the opportunities coming. He sees the level you are about to step into. And He knows exactly who belongs in that future and who does not. And here's what most people don't realize. Some relationships are not removed because they are toxic. Some are removed simply because their assignment in your life is complete. Their role in your story has finished. Their chapter has ended. And if God allowed them to stay longer than their assignment, it could delay the next chapter of your life. This is something we see again and again throughout life. People come into our lives at the right moment. They help us grow. They teach us something important. They walk with us through a season. But eventually, the season changes, and God begins writing a new chapter. But here's the challenge. Most people resist the transition, because letting go is uncomfortable. Letting go creates uncertainty. Letting go forces us to trust God without having all the answers. But here is something powerful to remember. Every chapter in your life prepares you for the next one. And sometimes, God closes one chapter so the next one can begin. But here's the part many people overlook. When God removes someone from your life, it often means He is protecting your peace. Because peace is one of the most valuable things you will ever have. Peace allows you to think clearly. Peace allows you to hear God's guidance. Peace allows you to grow without constant distraction. And sometimes certain relationships quietly drain that peace. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not maliciously, but their presence creates tension, confusion, pressure, doubt. And God, in His wisdom, begins removing what disturbs the peace He wants you to live in. But here's where everything changes. Because what feels like loneliness in the beginning often becomes clarity later. When the noise disappears, you begin hearing God's voice more clearly. When the distractions fade, your vision becomes sharper. When the wrong influences leave, your confidence begins to return. And suddenly, you realize something surprising. The space that felt empty at first is actually filled with new possibilities. But here's what most people don't realize. The moment God begins clearing certain people from your life, He is also preparing new connections. People who will support your calling. People who will strengthen your faith. People who will encourage your growth instead of resisting it. But God cannot bring those people into your life until the space is ready. Imagine trying to plant new seeds in a garden that is already overcrowded. Nothing new could grow. The soil would be too full. The space would be too crowded. So the gardener must first remove what no longer belongs. Clear the ground. Prepare the soil. Make room for something new. And this is exactly what God sometimes does in our lives. He clears the space. He removes what has completed its season. He prepares the soil of your life for something greater. And here's the encouraging truth. When God removes something, He always replaces it with something better aligned with your purpose. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not in the exact way you expect, but always in a way that moves your life forward. Because God never removes something without a reason. And He never closes a door without preparing another one somewhere else. But here's the interesting part. The new door often appears after you stop chasing the old one. Because sometimes we spend so much energy trying to bring back what left that we miss what God is trying to bring next. We replay conversations. We revisit memories. We question every detail. We try to fix something that God already finished. But the moment we release it, the moment we surrender, the moment we trust that God knows what He is doing, everything begins to shift. Because surrender opens the door for divine replacement. And here is where many people experience a powerful transformation. They stop asking, why did this person leave? And they begin asking, what is God preparing next? That single question changes everything because it moves your focus from loss to expectation. And expectation is where faith begins to grow. Faith says God is still working. God is still preparing. God is still arranging something good. And sometimes, the best thing you can do when someone leaves your life is simply trust that God saw something you did not. He saw the future. He saw the outcome. He saw the moments ahead that you could not yet imagine. And because He loves you, He intervened early. Now let me share another simple example. There was a young man who worked in a company for many years. He had a close friend there. They worked together every day, shared ideas, encouraged each other. But one day his friend suddenly left the company. The man felt disappointed. He felt abandoned. He wondered why the friendship ended so abruptly. But months later, something surprising happened. The company offered the man a leadership position, a position that required a completely different circle of influence, different responsibilities, different focus. And suddenly he realized something. If his friend had stayed, the dynamic would have made the transition difficult. Their comfort with each other might have prevented the growth he needed. But because the separation happened earlier, he was able to step into the new role fully. And that moment revealed something powerful. What once looked like a painful loss was actually a quiet preparation for promotion. And this is how God often works in our lives. He prepares the future before we even realize it is coming. He arranges circumstances behind the scenes. He moves pieces into place. And sometimes He removes certain people so that you can step into the next level without resistance. Because not everyone is meant to walk every stage of your journey. Some people help you start the race. Others walk with you through the middle. And a few are meant to stand with you at the finish line. But if someone from the starting line stayed with you forever, they might unintentionally slow down the pace you now need to run. So God gently redirects the path. Not to hurt you, but to help you keep moving forward. And here's something deeply encouraging. When God removes someone from your life, it does not mean your life is becoming smaller. It means your life is becoming more focused, more aligned, more prepared for what is coming next. Because the higher you go, the more clarity you need, the more discipline you need, the more purpose you need. And sometimes that clarity only appears after certain voices leave the room. But here's what makes this moment powerful. The removal you experienced may actually be the sign that your breakthrough season is approaching. Because throughout life, we see a pattern. Right before something big changes, God often clears the environment. right before promotion, there is preparation. Right before new doors open, old doors close. Right before destiny unfolds, certain relationships shift. And this is where faith becomes important, because faith allows you to trust God's plan, even when the picture is incomplete, even when you don't yet see the full explanation, even when the separation feels confusing. Faith whispers something powerful. God knows what He is doing, even now, even in this moment, even in this situation. God is still guiding your life. God is still protecting your future. God is still arranging something greater than what you can currently see. And here's the message I want you to hold on to today. You are not losing people. You are being guided toward the right people. You are not being rejected. You are being redirected. You are not falling apart. You are being aligned with your purpose. And sometimes the people God removes from your life were only blocking the view of the blessings ahead. But once they move aside, the path becomes clear. And suddenly, you see opportunities you could not see before. You meet people who understand your vision. You step into environments that match your calling. And everything begins to make sense, because what once looked like an ending was actually the beginning of something greater. And in the next part of this message, we're going to explore something even deeper. Why some relationships are removed to protect the calling on your life. Because once you understand this truth, sometimes God removes people from your life to protect the calling on your life. And this truth is not always easy to accept. Because we often assume that if someone is close to us, they must automatically belong in our future. But the truth is, closeness does not always mean alignment. Someone can be near you, yet still not be connected to the direction God is leading you. And when that happens, God begins adjusting the environment around you. He begins shifting relationships. He begins moving pieces on the board of your life, not to create chaos, but to create clarity. Because when your purpose begins to grow, your environment must change, your mindset must grow, your focus must sharpen. And sometimes, certain relationships cannot grow with the version of you that God is creating. But here's what most people don't realize. Not every relationship that ends is meant to be fixed. Some relationships end because their assignment is complete. And if we try to revive something that God has finished, we may unknowingly delay the next chapter of our lives. This is why seasons are so important. Everything in life moves through seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. And relationships move through seasons too. Some are meant to last a lifetime. But many are meant for a specific moment in your journey. They arrive when you need encouragement. They arrive when you need guidance. They arrive when you need companionship. But eventually, their role becomes complete, and God begins transitioning you into something new. But here's the challenge. When the transition begins, it rarely comes with a clear explanation. It comes with change, sudden distance, unexpected silence. Conversations that once flowed easily suddenly feel forced. Connections that once felt natural begin to feel different. And we often respond by trying to hold on tighter, trying to fix what is shifting, trying to preserve what God is quietly releasing. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is trust the process. Trust that if God allowed someone to leave your life, there is a reason. And often that reason becomes clear later. But here's what most people overlook. When God removes certain people, He is often protecting your identity, because identity is fragile during seasons of growth. When you are becoming a new version of yourself, you need encouragement, you need belief. You need people who support the transformation. But if someone constantly reminds you of your old self, your old limits, your old mistakes, they may unintentionally keep you trapped in a version of yourself that God is trying to evolve beyond. So God sometimes removes the voices that keep pulling you backward. Not because those people are bad, but because your future requires a different environment. Think about a seed planted in the ground. For a long time, nothing appears to be happening. The soil looks quiet, still, unchanged. But beneath the surface, roots are growing, strength is developing. And if the soil around that seed was constantly disturbed, the growth would stop. So the seed needs the right environment, the right protection, the right conditions to grow. And the same is true for your life. During seasons of transformation, God sometimes removes distractions so your roots can grow deeper, your faith can grow stronger, your vision can become clearer. But here's the powerful part. The moment you stop fighting the separation, peace begins to appear. Because peace is often the confirmation that God is guiding your life. When something is truly meant to stay, it does not constantly bring confusion. It does not constantly disturb your peace. It aligns with the direction God is leading you. And this is where perspective changes everything. Because instead of asking, why did this person leave? You begin asking, what is God preparing me for? That question opens the door to hope. Because when you believe God is preparing something greater, you begin walking forward instead of looking backward. And this is exactly what happened in the life of David in the Bible. Before David became king, he spent years in preparation, years in isolation, years where people misunderstood him, years where certain relationships shifted. But during those years, God was strengthening his character, building his courage, preparing him for leadership. And when the moment of promotion finally arrived, David was ready. But here's the important detail. If David had remained surrounded by the same environment that doubted him, the calling on his life might have been delayed. So God allowed separation. He allowed changes. He allowed the journey to unfold step by step. And eventually, that preparation turned into promotion. And this is where your story becomes powerful, because the same pattern appears again and again in life. Preparation, separation, promotion. First, God prepares you. Then He separates you from what no longer belongs. And finally, He promotes you into the next level of your purpose. But here's what many people miss. The separation stage often feels the most uncomfortable because it happens between two chapters. You are no longer where you used to be, but you have not yet arrived where you are going. It feels like standing on a bridge between the past and the future. And during that moment, life can feel uncertain. But here's the encouraging truth. Bridges are temporary. They are not meant to be permanent places. They exist only to move you from one side to the other. And the season you may be in right now could simply be a bridge season, a transition between what was and what is coming next. But here's what makes this season powerful. During the bridge, God is refining you. He is strengthening your faith. He is teaching you to trust Him even when you cannot see the full picture. And that trust becomes the foundation for the next chapter of your life. Because purpose requires faith. Growth requires faith. Destiny requires faith. And sometimes the only way faith can grow is when the familiar disappears. But here's something deeply encouraging. When God removes someone from your life, He is not creating emptiness. He is creating space. Space for new ideas. Space for new opportunities. Space for new relationships. Space for the next version of your life. And many times the people who enter your life after that space is created are exactly the people you needed all along. They understand your vision. They encourage your growth. They support the direction God is leading you. And suddenly, what once felt painful begins to make sense. But here's the interesting part. Those new connections often arrive when you stop chasing the past. Because when you release what left, you open your hands to receive what is coming. And that moment of release is powerful. Because it signals something important. It signals trust. Trust that God is guiding your story. Trust that God sees the future. Trust that God knows exactly what relationships belong in your destiny. And here's the truth many people discover later in life. Some of the people they once cried over losing were actually the very people who would have slowed down their purpose. But they could not see it at the time. Only later, after the breakthrough, after the growth, after the new chapter begins, do they realize something incredible. God was protecting them all along, protecting their peace, protecting their focus, protecting their future. And what once looked like a painful ending was actually a divine realignment. But here's where everything shifts, because when you begin to understand this principle, you stop fearing change. You stop resisting transitions. And you start trusting that every shift in your life is part of a bigger plan. You begin to see every closed door as potential protection, every separation as possible preparation, every change as movement toward something greater. And that perspective brings peace, because instead of worrying about what left, you begin expecting what is coming, and expectation changes your energy. Expectation strengthens your faith. Expectation reminds you that God is still working behind the scenes, even now, even in this moment, even in the situation you are facing. God is still arranging your future. God is still aligning the right people. God is still opening doors that no one can close. And the separation you experienced may simply be the moment when God began clearing the path, clearing the environment, clearing the distractions, so that when your breakthrough arrives, nothing will stand in the way. And in the next part of this message, we're going to talk about something incredibly powerful. Why the people God removes today often make room for the people who will help shape your destiny tomorrow. Because when you understand this truth, you will begin to see every change in your life through the lens of hope. Sometimes the people God removes today are the very people who were standing in the way of the destiny He prepared for tomorrow. And that truth can be difficult to accept in the moment, because when someone leaves your life, you feel the absence immediately. You notice the silence. You notice the empty space. You notice the change in routine. But what you cannot see yet is what God is quietly preparing on the other side of that separation. Because God never removes something without purpose, and He never allows a transition without a reason connected to your future. In fact, many times, the people who leave your life are making room for the people who will help shape your destiny. People who will strengthen your faith. People who will encourage your calling. People who will see something in you that others never noticed. But those people cannot arrive until the space is ready. And sometimes that preparation begins with removal. Now, this may sound surprising, but some of the most important relationships in your life will appear after a painful goodbye. Because when God prepares a new season, He also prepares new connections. Connections that are aligned with your purpose. Connections that are aligned with your growth. Connections that are aligned with the future He is leading you toward. But here's something many people discover later in life. The people who truly belong in your destiny do not create confusion in your spirit. They bring clarity. They bring encouragement. They bring peace. Because when God aligns the right relationships, they strengthen the direction He is taking you. They don't constantly pull you backwards. They don't constantly create doubt. They don't constantly drain your energy. Instead, they help you grow. They help you see your potential. They help you move closer to the life God is preparing for you. And sometimes, the only reason those people could not enter your life earlier is because the wrong people had not yet left. Think about that for a moment. Some of the greatest connections in your future may only appear after certain relationships disappear. Not because God is taking something away, but because He is making space for something greater. This reminds me of another powerful truth. Sometimes we cry over doors that God has already closed. We stand outside the door hoping it will open again. We replay memories. We revisit conversations. We imagine what could have been. But while we are standing there, God is gently whispering something important. There is another door, a better door, a door that leads to the life He prepared for you. But you cannot walk through it if you remain standing in front of the old one. So God waits patiently. He allows time to pass. He allows healing to happen. He allows clarity to arrive. And eventually, you begin walking forward again. And that moment is powerful, because forward movement activates faith. And faith opens the door to the next chapter of your life. Now, here is something deeply encouraging. When God removes someone from your life, it is not a sign that your story is getting smaller. It is a sign that your story is becoming more focused, more intentional, more aligned with the purpose He designed for you. Because destiny requires alignment. It requires the right environment, the right mindset, the right relationships. And when something in your life no longer aligns with the future God prepared, He begins adjusting the situation. Sometimes quietly, sometimes unexpectedly, but always with purpose. And many times, what feels like a painful ending is actually the beginning of a divine redirection. But here is the beautiful part. Once the redirection begins, new things start appearing, new opportunities, new connections, new ideas, new confidence. And slowly, you begin to see the path more clearly. You begin to understand why certain things had to change. You begin to realize why certain people had to leave. And suddenly, the confusion turns into clarity. The pain turns into perspective. The loss turns into growth. And you see something you could not see before. God was guiding you all along. Every step, every shift, every separation, He was protecting you, positioning you, preparing you for something greater than what you were holding on to. And here is the powerful truth. God sees your entire future. He sees every opportunity, every door, every person who will play a role in your destiny. And because He loves you, He sometimes removes people before they become obstacles to that future, not to hurt you, but to protect the path ahead. And if you trust Him during that process, something amazing happens. Your faith grows stronger. Your vision becomes clearer. Your confidence becomes deeper, because you begin to realize that God is not randomly allowing things to happen in your life. He is guiding your story. And even when you cannot see the full picture, you can trust the one who can. Now, maybe you are in a season right now where someone has recently left your life. Maybe the separation still feels fresh. Maybe the questions are still there. Maybe the silence still feels heavy. But I want you to remember something important. Just because someone left your life does not mean your future left with them. Your future is still intact. Your purpose is still alive. Your destiny is still unfolding. In fact, the removal you experienced may be the exact moment when God began preparing something new. Something you cannot yet see. Something you cannot yet imagine. But something that will one day make sense. Because God is always working behind the scenes. Even when life feels confusing. Even when relationships change. Even when people walk away. God is still arranging your future. God is still aligning the right people. God is still opening the right doors. And one day, you may look back at this moment and realize something incredible. The person you thought you lost was actually the person God lovingly removed. Not because you were not valuable, not because you were not worthy, but because your destiny required a different path. And that path is still unfolding, even now, even in this moment. So instead of focusing on who left, begin trusting who is guiding your life. The same God who created you. The same God who placed purpose inside your heart. The same God who knows every detail of your future. He is still leading you forward. He is still preparing the right connections. He is still opening the doors that belong in your story. And the separation you experienced may simply be the moment when God cleared the path for your next chapter. So keep moving forward. Keep trusting the process. Keep believing that God is working behind the scenes. Because sometimes the greatest blessings in your life begin with the people God removed. And the breakthrough you have been praying for may be closer than you think.